that was the noise I told you about. And really, I just want to say welcome. And I think across the country, it's a miserable, dark, rainy and windy evening. So thank you for coming into what we hope will be a warm space this evening. My name is Orla Keegan, and I work here at the Irish Hospice Foundation. And we've been going for 40 years now. And through all of those 40 years, we've held the same vision, what we would like to see, which is an Ireland where people who are facing dying and bereavement can receive the care and the support and the information that they need. So all of our work is towards that end. And this week is National Grief Awareness Week, and that's one of the things we host to try and make sure that people get the care and support and information that they need if they find themselves bereaved. It's a very lonely space, so the more we can open it up and meet each other virtually or in the real world, the better. This evening, this is an event that is part of National Grief Awareness Week. We call it Living with Grief. And we're really pleased that since we set this event up, Flanagan's funeral directors here in Dublin have supported us in doing that and sponsored us. So we're very, very grateful to them, and we really appreciate that ongoing support. This evening is really for people who probably didn't expect to be here. And I'm very conscious when I say welcome, it's a double-edged sword because we're also sorry that you're here, because many of you are here in that you're really feeling the absence of somebody that's very important in your life. And all of you will have had different relationships with those important people who could have been your parent or your lover, your husband, your wife, your child, your sibling. We really don't know who you have lost. But what we will say to you is that we will build a space for you to come into and to bring in to that space whatever you bring with you today. And that could be, it could be that you're very sad. It could be that you're feeling guilty or angry or empty or agitated or tense, or we can't tell, because any of us who are grieving and have been grieving know that even through a single day, you could have any of those sort of emotions and feelings accompanying you. So if we can just bring them in and don't judge yourself. We know that the fact that you're here at all, you're probably hoping for something. You might be looking for advice, you might be looking for information or some sort of comfort, or you might have just come and you're not sure what you're looking for. And we'd say to you, that's absolutely fine. And we'll be here for 90 minutes. And what we've done is really set out some activities, some two talks. We'll have a question and answer type of panel discussion at the end, and we will have some readings. So we're hoping that between all those different inputs, that maybe something will meet a need of yours, even if you can't articulate it just this minute. I've said already that you can't see each other, but I know in terms of numbers that we are coming up to 150 people here this evening, and we always tell people that there are others in the room, in the hope that it makes you feel less alone. You are not the only one. Your loss is only your loss, but there are others there who are trying to explore what they're going through as well. I'm going to begin the evening because time is precious. And this particular beginning is really a way of reinforcing that message that there are people out there and people who can support and care. And we're going to begin the evening with a very simple activity, the lighting of a candle. And when I say a candle, we're actually going to light upwards of 30 candles here this evening. Dervla is going to change the screen and she's going to invite in representatives from different bereavement support organisations across Ireland and invite them in to light a candle as really a symbol of meeting our grief and doing something collective here this evening. So you're going to be seeing people appearing on screen, and each and every person here today represents a bereavement support service. And you can see that the people are holding up their candles here. And the types of services are here. I'm looking at people who work with adults who've met sudden death and who've met suicide, who support people who've died in hospice or through cancer. I can see services here who are working to support children who are grieving. And I'm seeing services who are supporting parents who have lost a child. So there's a huge array of hope out there in that we can see this warmth, and in a way the candle is giving us some of that warmth. Dervla, who is our colleague here at Irish Hospice Foundation, she's going to send you on details of who's out there for you. So you'll get it on an email. But I think what's really lovely today in looking at those candles and those faces is knowing that there are people out there. And when we're looking at that flame, I'd also notice what a gentle little light it leaves. It doesn't glare, it doesn't shout. And I'm going to remind you to be gentle on yourselves through this evening and through your grief. And we'll also take a moment to look at that flame, and some of the flames are flickering. And, movement is so important. And I think when we look at that candle and see the movement, what it's reminding me of is that sometimes we forget to move. We can be so tense and contained in our grief that we're holding it all in. So I'm going to just remind you to move yourselves through the next 90 minutes, even just little stretches, gentle stretches. And to remember that your grief happens in your body as well. It's happening to the whole of you. And you need to feed your body, you need to water your body, you need to rest your body, and you need to exercise your body. And little movements are part of that. Take a moment, just take a moment to look at this sense of warmth and support on screen before we move on. That's lovely. I thank each and every one of you and your organizations for all that you do, and the hope that you bring. Thank you. We're going to move into now the next part of our evening. And I guess when I said at the beginning, we hope that people will be able to get care, support, and information. This first talk is by my colleague at Irish Hospice Foundation, Catherine Tierney. And Catherine is the clinical bereavement manager there, and she also manages the bereavement support line. And Catherine is going to take the next 20 minutes or so to share with you some of what we think we understand about grief and loss. So I thank you, Catherine, for your time, and over to you.
Thanks, Orla. Thank you so much. And Orla always wraps us up at the start of these evenings with such a warm and gentle introduction. So I hope that you're leaning into all of that warmth and gentleness and compassion for yourselves. Um, I've got a lot of slides here, and just remember what Orla said. We're going to send you out an information pack at the end of all of this. All of you who've registered, we're going to be sending you out the slides and the recording. So just take in what you can of the whole evening, but of these slides, don't worry if you miss something or you wish maybe I'd stayed a bit longer on a particular topic. Don't worry because you'll have the slides, you'll have the information. Um, and Orla mentioned this that I manage the bereavement support line. You also have that as a resource to phone at any stage to say, look, could you tell me a bit more? This is my situation and I'm struggling with this area. So there's lots of resources, there's lots of information. Take in what you can, and we wish you well with that. So I'll start with this. This is a lovely poem by a woman called Rachel Naomi Raymond, and the essence of it is that grieving allows us to heal. It allows us to remember with love rather than pain, and that's just so incredibly important. That this process of grieving, this work that we have to do, each of us that's bereaved, and it is active work. It's hard work, and sometimes it's painful work, but it's really worth the journey because it helps us to remember with love rather than pain. I walk a lot near where I live in woodlands, and if you ever notice, I mean, this time with all these storms, and last year with Storm Owen, um, when a tree comes down, the impact of it can be just devastating, and it has such a ripple effect. And one of the things that we know is that there's a primary loss, which is the death of your loved one, but there's so many secondary losses that go along with that. And if you think about the secondary losses, there can be the loss of your constant companion, the loss of your financial security, maybe the loss of maybe social circles because maybe they shrink over time with the loss of your loved one. There might be you might have to downsize. There's just so many implications in terms of the losses that follow after the death of a loved one. Um, and I took this picture in woodland that's near in Tipperary, and it's just such a beautiful view. But it's just really to say that the journey of grief isn't linear. It's I know this sort of might suggest that, but it's really just to evoke a sense of that with grief you have to hold on to a sense that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and a sense of hope. And Orla mentioned, the candles and the beauty of the candles and how gentle it is and how delicate it is. But if you think of a candle light or a little tea light, I'd really encourage you to imagine that in one hand you need to hold that little tea light, which is quite a fragile thing. It's a hope. It's a hopeful thing. It's a light in the dark. But with the other hand, I think our message in Irish Hospice Foundation is lean into your supports, lean into your family, lean into your friends. I sort of picture it as a circle of support, which is all of those people that love you and that are around you. And then another outside circle is the bereavement support line and all of those fabulous organizations who lit the candles at the beginning, all of those peer support organizations who've got specialist knowledge and support for you. And then that outer circle is professional support if that's needed down the line, but to lean into that, but to hold on to the hope and to hold on to the light. This is a really important message. There's a sense sometimes that message is still out there around there being stages of grief, and it's really, really important for us to say that there are no stages. There aren't 5 stages. There's not 7, and there's not 3. It's not a linear journey. It's different for everyone, and it's a little bit more like the squiggly journey on the right hand side. It's like a ball of wool has fallen to the floor, and it's in a jumbly mess. Um, and in the acute period of grief, which can go on for 6 months or so, and these are rough guidelines, but even the first 6 months can be, people call it describe it as being a sort of tsunami of grief. They describe it as being all over the place. Orla alluded to that, that in one day you might feel burst into tears, you might think you're okay, you might feel numb, you might feel shock, you might feel a whole roller coaster of emotions. And that messiness is very confusing. And sometimes it's quite frightening, and people wonder, is it normal? We get calls to the line, and people say to us, am I going crazy? I'm feeling this, then I'm feeling that. I don't know. I can't seem to make decisions. I can't seem to, I just don't know what to do. I'm really, really confused. And just to know that grief hits us on so many levels. It hits us physically. You might feel nauseous. You might feel you don't have an appetite. You don't really want to eat. Your sleep might be affected. You might have nightmares. Cognitively, you might go back to work and think, actually, I can't even function at work because you can't seem to make clear decisions. So I just want you to hold on to that idea of the scrambled ball of wool, because really that's what grief is like, certainly in those initial months as you adjust to a world that is just completely shattered and upended. And we've lots of practical tips. And again, you're going to get the resource pack. I'll give you the links as well later on. But it's really important to know that grief is exhausting. And really, that image says it all. And if you think about that grief impacting you physically, and I didn't mention that, but it's important to know that grief can also make you feel very anxious. It can make people feel panicky, especially if your loved one was somebody that you really depended on, or was your rock, or somebody that you've lived with and known your whole entire adult lives, and suddenly they're not there, they're not in your life, and you might be living alone by yourself for the very first time. So it can stir up so much, but it hits us physically, emotionally, cognitively, behaviorally, even spiritually. People can really feel, how could this happen? It can really kind of cause an existential crisis too. So above all, and Orla mentioned this, be so, so gentle with yourself. Don't drive on, try to push yourself through it. Don't avoid it. It really does. It is an embodied thing. You feel it in the body. So slow down, be gentle with yourself. If people are offering you help and support, take it. If people are offering to drop in meals or walk the dog or do a shop for you or clean the house or do anything, say yes, because you need all the help you can get. Rest. I would say one thing, that if you're not sleeping and you're not eating, definitely link in with your GP. Sometimes grief can really affect sleep, especially if people's sleep is disturbed. You might have nightmares, you might not, but you might have very impactful dreams. So just if your sleep is unraveling, if you're not eating properly, go and see your GP. It's really, really important, because your mental health will unravel. It's too important. So rest, mind yourself. Don't grieve alone. I mean, the message of this whole evening is you are not alone. Don't try and go it alone. And it's lovely that you're here tonight, because you understand that message. And Orla mentioned this too, exercise. And we're not talking about a marathon. We're not talking about big, you know, difficult walks. We're talking about gentle walks, exercise, moving the body. It's really, really good for the head. And for grief to exercise, because it takes you out of your head a bit, and you can only grieve a certain amount in terms of emotional grieving before you have to dip out of it. So it's just so good on many levels. Um, a key message for tonight, if you can take one thing away, is dose your grief. Dip into it and dip out of it. You cannot grieve all the time. You just can't. It's too exhausting. And that oscillation, that movement, and Orla talked about that, the flicker of the candle. Dip in and dip out, step into it and step out. And by stepping in, I mean into looking at photos, talking to your other loved ones, remembering your loved one, maybe visiting places that were significant. And that might trigger emotions, that might cause you to shed a lot of tears. It might cause others to shed a lot of tears. And that's really good, and it's important. So don't avoid the feelings, give them space, give them room. But dose your grief, dip into it. You can't grieve all the time. And then dip out, have a shower, go for a walk, put structure on your day. So you need to do both. And the last message on that slide is really about grief affects us cognitively. So our judgment is really a little bit impaired, especially in those first in those early months. So no big decisions is a really good message. What helps? I mean, this idea of information, sometimes information is tremendously important because people see themselves in the information and they go, oh my God, I'm so relieved to read that because now I understand that's normal and how I'm feeling is normal. So if you want to gather some information for yourself or for your loved ones, for your kids, for your siblings, for your adult parent who's bereaved and you're bereaved too, look up bereaved.ie. It's the easiest signposting to give you, and you'll get a wealth of information there. You'll also get practical tips and guidance there. You'll get audios, videos, podcasts, books. There's just so much. And I've mentioned it before and I'll mention it again. The bereavement support line is a really, really lovely service that you can ring if you're a supporter of somebody who's bereaved and you're wondering, how do I help them? How can I help them? Or I'm a little bit worried about them. Or if you're somebody who's grieving and you just want space to talk about your loved one, use their name, talk about how you met them, talk about their memories, and really get in touch with some of that emotional grief, but also just touch in to say, look, I'm not sure that I'm doing okay. I'm not sure if I need counseling or whatever questions you have. But it's a lovely, really compassionate listening space for you. And people sometimes stay on the line for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and you can ring it more than once. So that's really important. It's a free phone number. It's Monday to Friday, 10 o'clock to 1 o'clock. Um, You'll get the number, but it's 1-800 80 70 77. But you'll get it in the information pack as well. Um, this is a kind of a lovely little reminder that we all grieve. We all have, if you look at the image there, it's of a fingerprint. So we all have fingerprints, but each fingerprint, which is an astounding fact, is unique to each of us. So we all grieve in our own way. And some of that is about we all have individual styles. There's extroverts, there's introverts. We all have particular coping styles. So I might be a very good coper, or I might be somebody who really doesn't adapt well to change. And grief and the death of a loved one is an upending of your whole world. And some people really don't cope well with that. Some people were ready for the death. I know when an uncle of mine died a couple of years ago, and we were all very close to him, but he was so ready to go. He was in a nursing home and he was very ready. And we were relieved for him and glad for him. And so there can be that sense of a readiness if you've lived through maybe a long illness with your loved one. But can also be the shock that you think you're going to be ready and you're never ready. It's still a shock, even if you've been living with loss and if somebody has been terminally ill for a long time, it's still a shock. So readiness can be a helpful factor, and sometimes it doesn't help at all. The nature of the relationship, again, you'll completely understand this. If you loved somebody deeply, then you're going to grieve deeply. That they talk about that the grief is the price we pay for love, and the depth of the love is the depth of the grief. And just think about that. If you're somebody who's grieving a relationship of 60 years or more, or the death of a child, or the death of a sibling, or the death of a best friend, or a neighbor that you've grown up with, the depth of the love is the depth of the grief. So just, really absorb that. It's not an easy journey. It's not a quick journey, but it really is worth doing so that you can remember with love and not with pain. Previous loss experiences is really important because you might have had other losses that you've never grieved. And it's really important to factor those in because they may upend with this particular loss. Um, and one thing to mention in terms of the nature of the relationship, you might have also been estranged from the person who died. You might have had a very difficult relationship with the person who died. So that'll also impact the grieving process. And you might have other stressors. There might be financial stresses. You might have to move house as a result of this death. Um, you might have to start working or start working more. There might be somebody who's got a terminal diagnosis or a cancer diagnosis in the midst of a bereavement. So there's so many things that are unique to you. So take yourself very gently. Orla mentioned this. You might be feeling any and all of those and other things as well. You might be feeling them in the morning, in different things in the morning. You might be feeling something different in the afternoon or the evening. It is a roller coaster. And really, I'm saying in the brackets there, normal, as long as if all of those feelings persist, if the feelings of real distress and um, brokenness and devastation, if they go on more than 6 months to a year, and you cannot function, you really just cannot function, that is when you reach for support and you go to your GP. That's really, really an important message. Um, this slide is something that sometimes people don't really know this, and it's really helpful to know this, that you might have a couple who are grieving, let's say the death of a child, and one of them is an intuitive griever. They want to talk about their feelings. They're comfortable talking about their feelings. They cry, and they really find that tremendously helpful. They're an intuitive feeler. But they may be living with someone who's an instrumental griever. And an instrumental griever is somebody who wants to channel their grief into action. They might want to fundraise for a charity or get involved in a building project or get involved in a fundraising project, but they're channeling their grief through doing, and not through feeling. And sometimes the intuitive griever might look at this person and think, "Oh my God, are you not upset at all? Did you not care? Are you not grieving at all? How can you not join me in the sorrow that I feel?" And the thing to remember is the instrumental griever is grieving, and their emotional grieving, they'll do it privately, but it won't necessarily be seen by others. So it can be very harshly judged. So it's important just to know that about yourself. Which one are you? And maybe if there's the sort of the opposite type of griever in your circle, you might have been looking at them and wondering, where's your grief? And now maybe you know a little bit more about them and where their grief is. Lois Tonkin gave us this image, which is really, really helpful. Back in the day, certainly when I was growing up, there was a sense that if you ignored your grief for long enough, it would go away and dissolve. And if you could step over it, leave it behind you and move on. But now we know that grief doesn't go away. But what we need to do is grow our lives around the grief, that sense of integrating the grief in our lives. And that's really important to know. But it's also important to know that grief is tough work. It's an active process, that we need to make an appointment with our grief, give ourselves time to grieve, and then take a break from it and get on with our lives and paying bills and doing the shopping and whatever else you need to do. But that we dip in and dip out of it. Um, One of the things that's important to know too is that grief has tasks associated with it. So, that important message of there's no stages, but there is a task of work to be done. And this will make sense to you. The task number one is accepting the reality of the loss. And if you think about people who talk about getting stuck in their grief, they're really getting stuck at task one. If you think about that, they're really struggling after 6 months, after a year, they're really struggling to accept the reality. They don't want the reality of the loss to be real. They don't want to let it in to their consciousness. So people who get stuck in their grief, and sometimes that's called complicated grief or prolonged grief, they really are getting stuck in task one. So task two is processing the pain, processing the emotions. And again, that idea that we often are saying to callers to the bereavement support line is make an appointment with your grief, sit with it, or meet others and talk about your loved one, use their name, look at photos or remember them, reminisce, and allow the pain of those memories, and also the laughter. You laugh, you cry as you remember things, but allow the feelings to surface. Number three is a big task. How do you move on with your life? New roles, new responsibilities, maybe a completely changed life. You might have to move houses, you might have to downsize. As I said before, you might have financial insecurities now. You might have to find work that you didn't have before. How do you adjust to a life without your loved one in it? That's a big, big task. And all of it is an adjustment and a change. And these are changes that you didn't want. So it's really difficult. And accept as many offers as help of help as you can in that task. And number four, that sense of an enduring connection with the deceased. And it's a really important message that death ends a life, but not a relationship. That death ends a life, but not a relationship. That the love you have for your loved one lives on until your last breath. So that idea of where do you feel and how do you feel most connected with your loved one? It might be a particular thing in the house. It might be particular clothes. It might be a piece of jewelry. It might be the garden. It might be a particular place or a piece of music or even television programs. Sometimes people are reminded of a loved one because they always watched, I don't know, Coronation Street with them or something. But whatever it is, you'll know yourself. Where do you feel and how do you feel most connected with your loved one? I've talked about this, but the importance of dipping in and dipping out, dose your grief, make an appointment with it, but then step out and attend to your life moving forward. You're paying the bills, you're doing the shopping, you're attending to this altered world, you're putting structure on your day, you're getting out. And you know, if you've children and you're now a lone parent, you've so many responsibilities now. So you're dipping in, making time for both. And that's really important. Continuing bonds, just to say a little bit more about this, I thought, it's kind of useful to know about your own continuing bonds. On the left-hand side, one of my continuing bonds with my mom. I mean, there's many ways that you feel connected with the loved one who's died. But I know my mom, her kind of language of love was the kitchen. She loved baking and she loved cooking. It's what we'd most associate with her. And I still have lots of her dishes. And when I reach for her dishes, and I have lots of them, small little ones and lovely different ones, I think of her, even if it's fleeting, I think of her and I wonder, and I'll never know, but where she got some of them, and where she bought them. They're decades old now, but it's a lovely connection with my mum. My dad, I mentioned this last year for any of you that tuned in last year, but my dad was a farmer's son from Tipperary, and he came up to Dublin when he was only about 17. He'd no leaving cert, he'd very little education. But when he was living in digs and house sharing, he was introduced to classical music and Maria Callas. And an abiding memory for me of my dad is listening to my dad listening to Maria Callas. And I think for all of us, whenever we hear her on the radio or whatever, I think of my dad, and I can probably sing along to some of them. So that's a continuing bond with my dad. The picture in the middle is a brother of mine, my youngest brother, who died when he was 3.5. And that's the last photo that we have of him. Um, his name was Paulie. And I really feel a very strong bond with him when I look at that photo. Now, I didn't get that photo till my mum died. Um, so he died when he was 3.5, and we were all steps and stairs above him, but we were all 10 years and younger. So we were all young, the siblings. And my poor parents, back then, that's a long time ago, they had absolutely no map of grief. They didn't know how to process it. They didn't know how to talk about it. And in the culture that existed at the time, there was sort of a sense that children didn't grieve. That was kind of a common idea. But B, there really was a sense of as quick as you can, step over it and drive on, move on with your life. And as a result of that, it was a it was a traumatic time for all of us. I mean, and I include my parents in that. But the continuing bonds, the reason I'm mentioning my brother's death at all is one, to remember that children grieve too. It's so important. And now we know that more than ever. And if you want to know how to support any of the bereaved children in your lives, look at bereaved.ie, and there's a ton of information there. By age and stage, how to support children, and just to remember that, and I know you know this, but even 3, 4, 5, you really are trying to make sense. I know for me and for my brothers, we had to try to make sense of the loss of our brother and his absence because we never talked about him after he died. So from 3.5 on until my parents died, we never talked about him. But if you can imagine that little children and older children, they try to make sense of the loss. And sometimes with young children, they'll try to make sense of it in their own small little way, in their own, if you can imagine their little formed minds. And sometimes they might blame themselves, they might feel guilt or shame. So it's incredibly important to understand the grieving family and to support all the ages of the children in that family. So that's just my little brother. And I want to say one thing. I feel great love for my brother when I look at that picture, but also I feel his love for our family. So I think pictures can be very evocative, and music can be very evocative. I know somebody recently who talked about her brother who died, and he developed a playlist for her, and she feels so connected to her brother when she plays that playlist. So there's beautiful ways to be connected to your loved ones. I've mentioned this about complicated grief, which is also called prolonged grief. So just to remember that if you're finding yourself stuck in your grief, and that's at least 6 months on, if not a year on, and you just the sort of the guidance is if you're really not functioning, then lean in to your GP, talk to your GP. If you're really not sure, call the bereavement support line and talk through it. We can signpost you. If you give us your email and your location, we can signpost you to people that we know are grief trained or are trained in complicated grief. We can also signpost you to people that are trauma trained. And I really mean that, especially where a death has occurred in traumatic circumstances, where there's been a sudden death, a death of a child, where you might feel that it was a traumatic loss that you need specialist support for. If you call the bereavement support line, if you give us your email address and your location, we can send you out information about support services and counselling services. Um, I think somebody sent in a question about anticipatory grief, and this is really important that if you're living with someone who is terminally ill, you are already grieving. It's called a living loss. And there's so much guidance that we have on the website, and it's going to be sent out to you as well in the pack. But I suppose if I was to give you one message, one is it's really useful to know what to expect, what to expect about maybe these last months or these last days. That's really good to be forearmed and to have the information. We have a great free service called the Information Support Line for end of life care, and you can call that and you can ask your questions, and we have booklets and everything. So if you're going through and grieving a living loss, there is great support out there. I would say, before I move on from this slide, if I had one bit of advice, it's don't be left with any regrets. So if you can imagine, fast forward, you don't want to have a situation where you say, I just regret that I dot dot dot. So whatever you can do now, especially around spending time with the person who's dying, and that might be spending time in silence. I know this person that I was speaking to, her brother died of motor neuron disease, and she talked about the precious time that they just sat together in silence. There were no words. The words weren't needed. So there's something that's beautiful about silence too, just silent accompaniment. Sometimes words aren't needed. Um, Disenfranchised grief. I won't say too much about this, but just to say that there is a term for the grief that is hidden and really isn't recognized and supported by society. Sometimes pet loss is a very good example of it. Um, what's really good for our organisation is that somebody who's grieving a pet can phone our bereavement support line. There's a leaflet on pet loss, and that really is very useful to people. Um, but if you think about disenfranchised grief, that can also be where a family member has died by suicide, and there's a stigma around it, and people are just awkward, and the family don't always get the support that they need. Um, the loss might be a hidden loss. It might be a relationship that was hidden, and you're not getting the support that you need really to grieve that. You can call the line, the bereavement support line, for any of these. Sometimes a griever isn't recognized. And I often think about carers in nursing homes, nurses in nursing homes. Sometimes they've known a resident for years and years and years, and they really grieve them. Maybe they might have been closer to them than to their own parents or to their grandparents. So sometimes grievers aren't recognized. And if you feel, actually, I didn't get the support I need, call the bereavement support line, because you can grieve with us. And that's a beautiful thing. Um, I mentioned this a little, if you're a supporter of someone, if you are the person who is really trying to do the best you can for someone who's bereaved, information really helps that you understand what they're going through, but also helping them to understand. And I was giving you that link, bereaved.ie. It's a really helpful link. I mentioned at the very beginning, be practical with your help, then be emotional with your help. You can sit with them, you can let them talk, you can let them cry, you can cry with them. All of that is lovely support. But grief support is also the nuts and bolts of do a shop for them, hoover the room, walk the dog, put the bins out, mind the kids for a while, drop over a lasagna. So whatever you do, don't say, look, I'm here for you, let me know what you need, because cognitively, somebody who's grieving is all over the place. Be specific, offer, and then maybe just do it, put the bins out anyway. Some of these things are very practical. And if you are a supporter, you know that you can call our line to get guidance too. So that's really important. There's tons of support. So bereaved.ie is one I've mentioned a few times. That links you to childhoodbereavement.ie. So supporting all of the bereaved children that are impacted by this death. Um, there's information, there's leaflets, and we can post out leaflets. There's videos, there's audios, there's podcasts, and there's books. So there's a wealth of information. Here are all the fantastic organizations, and you saw some of the people from those organizations lighting the candles. So there's great love, there's great compassion, and there's great support out there. So do lean into that. And this is my last slide. So just to say, the bereavement support line is also here for you. But I would say, if ever you're concerned, go to your GP. If ever you feel in crisis, there's a great crisis line that Pieta runs, and it's 1-800-247-247. It's good to have that if ever you felt that you were in crisis, or the person that you're looking after. And other than that, remember, you'll get this pack, you'll get a video, and you'll get the slides. So you can look at all of this in your own time. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Orla.
Thank you, Catherine, very, very much. And I think your messages are very clear, just how hard work grief is. And thank you for the tour of your family and for meeting your parents and your lovely brother Paul. And you've told us exactly that you're remembering them now with love more than pain. And I think that message is very real. So thank you for sharing personally as well. Catherine mentioned and has had it in her family, the fact that children grieve. And I'm going to introduce you now to another colleague at Irish Hospice Foundation, Sonia Renix. And Sonia is the Children's Bereavement Manager there, and she's the coordinator of Irish Childhood Bereavement Network. And she's going to talk to us about children. Thank you, Sonia.
Thanks a million, Orla, and thanks, Catherine. I love listening to you, so thanks so much. As Orla mentioned, my name is Sonia Renix, and I'm the Children's Bereavement Manager with the Irish Hospice Foundation, and I coordinate the Irish Childhood Bereavement Network. So one of the things that we do is provide information and signposting to anyone who's supporting a bereaved child, be they a family member, a teacher, a supporter in any way. So have a look at our website, and we will send it on afterwards, but I just wanted to highlight it at the start. It's packed full of information that you can trust in relation to supporting bereaved children. So it's childhoodbereavement.ie, and don't be afraid to get in touch either with us. So I know most of you here tonight are bereaved, and you might be here looking for ways to navigate your own grief. But many of you are also here with your children in mind, or a bereaved child you might be supporting who are grieving, and you may be looking for information and some tips on how to support them. Might be your own child, a grandchild, niece, nephew, neighbour, etc. Or you might work with children as a teacher or childminder, or the many other roles you might have. So, in our team or on our team, we often say, think adult, think child. To remind ourselves that where there is a bereaved adult, there's a high likelihood of a child being affected too. And I imagine you already know that if you're here tonight. We often see parents looking to support their children before they support themselves. And I'd just like to kind of give an additional reminder. I know Catherine mentioned it already, but please do link into those circles of support for yourself as well, because you can't pour from an empty cup. So I'm here to provide you a little bit of information about what might be happening for children as they grieve, and how you might support them, and what those little differences for children might be as well. And Orla said something that really struck me there earlier, and it was that, what we're going to do is share what we think we know about grief. And it absolutely is based on evidence and best practice, but there's nothing better than the knowledge you have of your own children or those children that you're close to, that you're supporting. Nothing can replace your understanding of how to comfort and support your child. Oftentimes, when grief comes into the picture, we forget that. We become kind of stunned by the bigness of the emotions and things. But you are the expert in that comfort. So just to remind you of that as we move forward as well. So I suppose to start with, it's important to recognize that children of all ages grieve too, and that their grief is just a little bit different. There's lots of similarities too, so I don't want you to forget a lot of the things that Catherine has said. So, there are no stages. Continuing bonds are really, really important. The tasks that she outlined are similar. And things like accepting the reality of the loss and those different tasks that we all have to go through, they stand for children too. Children, without exception though, need the support of the adults in their life to navigate those tasks and to journey with grief as well. So I suppose the differences that I mentioned in relation to children are really about how children understand death and understand the changes that are happening inside of them in terms of their emotions. They'll have a different understanding of their feelings. Some of the feelings they may never have felt them before. So because of that, they really, really, need the adults in their lives to support them with that. How their understanding and their feelings change over time is slightly different with children as well, and I'll get into that a little bit later. Um, the support that they need is a little bit different depending on the ages that they are too. So children's age and stage of development plays a big role. And, to really kind of simplify that, what we mean by that is children can only grieve at the age that they're at. So a 5-year-old will only understand grief and won't be only able to experience it as a 5-year-old, based on how they have experienced the world and what they can actually grasp. And as that child grows and develops, turns 7, turns 12, turns 15, they'll understand their grief in a different way. It will feel different, and they'll understand their loss in a different way as well. And because of that, we are highly likely to see grief re-emerge in children as they move through their developmental ages, as we call them. The developmental ages and stages, they're kind of loosely based around age, but I wouldn't hold too tightly to that. Children grow and develop in unique ways. There are some kind of loose settings, but it's really, children are individual. But so it's responding to the child where the child is at, and you know the child best. So, I mean, I can give you very loosely what, an age group of children might be experiencing. So, for example, when we look at very young children, infants and young toddlers, they won't be able to understand that a person has died. They'll feel their absence. So, and they'll also feel changes in routine. So routine is very, very important in terms of comforting children at that age. So children who are a little older, 2 right up to 6 or 7, again mightn't understand death, mightn't understand that it's permanent and can't be reversed. So because of that, they may search for the person. So again, routine, comfort, and I suppose responding to the child's expression of their feelings, however they express it. So you might see a 6-year-old maybe going back to more what the way they were when they were 4 or they're 3, but I'd respond to the age that they're actually expressing, because the comfort and the response that they need would usually match in with that. So, for that age group as well, you might hear a child saying, yeah, I understand that the person has died, but then it might come to Christmas or their birthday, and you might hear them saying, so what time are they going to get here? They love birthdays, they love Christmas. So that permanence piece, they just can't understand it yet. It can be a little bit of a fright when you hear it as a parent or a supporter, but it really is that their brain, you've done everything right, but their brain just is catching up on trying to understand that concept that the person can't come back. So kind of moving up in the ages, children in middle childhood, let's say, from 6 to 12, and yeah, right up to 12, they can experience something that we call magical thinking. And they may create their own story about what has happened and why. And in amongst that, they may end up deciding, and they mightn't express it, that what has happened, or that they caused the person's death, that it was their fault in some way. So it's a really important one to tune into. They might think that the fight that they had with dad or mum at the checkout in Tesco over nothing, over a chocolate bar, actually caused a heart attack and things like that. So really important to check in on what the child believes about the how the person died. Another really important piece then, I suppose, is around teenagers. And teenagers, they're already going through a difficult phase. So this is, really interrupting their kind of quest to form their own identity. So it can shake their reality a lot. And we might already be having a little bit of a difficulty chatting to teenagers, but I suppose it's important to remember that these are still children wrapped in kind of more adult bodies, and their reality has very much been shaken. So it's really important to be able to involve them in any choices that they can be involved in relation to funerals, etc. But also to maybe take the pressure off a little bit. We often say to schools, that teenager isn't going to be able to function in the same way as other ones are. So a little bit of the pressure coming off for a little while whilst they adjust to, this really, really massive thing that has happened in their life. They understand things in a little bit more adult way, but they actually, their coping skills aren't adult just yet. So another key difference that I just wanted to highlight is how children they jump in and out of grief. And this is something that we call puddle jumping. So we as adults tend to stay immersed in grief, but actually children, and it's almost a self-preservation piece, they don't stay in it, they jump in and out of it. So one minute you might look out the window and the child is playing, then they're upset, and then they're back playing. And that's really, really just very typical, and it's part of the child's response to grief. So and I often find it as a comforting thought because they actually get some break from it, and it's a really important thing for them to be able to do. You'll see that, you'll see maybe towards the evening time and night times, their ability to be distracted from the grief becomes less. So you might see a lot more emotion at night. So in terms of, I guess, I would chat to a lot of parents on the phone when the family is bereaved, and we often get asked about how to explain death to children, what they should know. And what I would say is that talking about death and grief with children is very important. It helps them to navigate confusion, to process, to express themselves, and to seek and receive reassurance. These conversations need to be factual, but they also need to be age appropriate. So if we remember the 5-year-old again that we talked about earlier, they can only understand a certain amount. And, the amount of information that we give to them needs to be kind of small, like small pieces of a jigsaw that's built up over time. Teenagers will understand a little bit more, but we, the adults in their lives, do have to use judgment in order to weigh how much we think that they can cope with. We can keep it factual and truthful, but we still discern how much we discuss in terms of cause of death, detail, and that sort of thing. And these aren't once-off conversations. They're going to continue over the years, and it's really important to keep the conversations open. It's also important to remember that if you don't feel able at the time to have the conversation or to answer a question that's asked by a child, that's okay too. It's just important to remind them, yep, I'm really glad you asked that question. I can't answer it right now, but can we come back to it and make sure to come back with it? That's absolutely fine. So, another question then that we would get asked a lot is around if a child needs counselling or professional help. And, the majority of children don't. The majority of children and young people learn to cope with grief within the context of their families and their communities, their own circles as well, within the schools, their friendships, etc. There are a couple of things, and actually, I think there were a couple of questions around this, so I might leave this for a little bit later when we're having the panel discussion. We can get into it in a little bit more detail. There are certain things that would indicate that a child needs some more help. One of them that I will mention now that's slightly different to adults. So Catherine had said, if after about 6 months to a year that the distress is continuing, that will be the point of time for an adult to seek help. With children, it's slightly different. What I would say is, if there is an absence of puddle jumping. So if, over a period of time, and it's not a set amount of time, if there's no puddle jumping, even earlier on, in fact, then the child is getting no relief or no break from that grief. So it's really important to check in, or at least, sense check with a professional what might be happening for the child. The last bit I'll touch on here is something that comes up all the time, and again, it's back to that parents thinking about the children first, and completely understandable. And we hear parents saying, that they often try to hide sadness, or they don't cry in front of children because they don't want to upset them. And what I would say is that it's really important to show emotion in front of children in relation to grief, because hiding emotion can send a confusing message to children, and make them feel that, crying or being upset isn't okay. You're the role model for your child's grief, so they watch and learn from you. And you can explain to them that we all have good days and bad days, and that it's perfectly fine to have those emotions, and it can open up conversations too. What I would say is, though, children have a tendency to think that they have to look after adults in their lives. And it's really important that while you're upset, it's important to remind them that you're getting support as well from your circles of support that Catherine mentioned earlier. That you're talking to Auntie Mary, or, you're going to talk in a group, or you're getting support in different ways, and that you're still the adult in the life of the child, and your job is to look after them. But important, it's okay to be upset around them and with them. So it's a lot of information in a short time, but in summary, I guess, remember, children grieve too, that their grief is expressed a little bit differently. Keep the communication going, hang on in there with the repeated questions. They're building the picture slowly over time, depending on their age. So remember the little 5-year-old trying to form that picture in their mind. Reassure them that they're safe, that you're there for them. And remember that, again, as I said at the start, you're the expert in how to comfort your child. They're going through grief, they're not grief. And you're the important factor in that. You're that safety for them. So remember that. So we'll see you in a little while during the panel discussion, but thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Sonia. And I found what you said reassuring. So I think that's a measure of really how much you were able to get across in that short time. And we know, as you said, we'll be speaking with you later, and the resources are there. So we had asked people to send in questions in advance, but I just want to draw your attention as well. There's a little Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and you can write a question or a comment in there. And even if we don't get to answer it in depth during the discussion, it will help us to make sure that the resources we send out in the pack are tailored to whatever needs you have. So do feel free to put something into the Q&A. Before we move into that panel, I said we'd have a couple of readings. So we're going to have a short reading now, which really picks up on that theme of childhood bereavement. And it's my colleague, Nicole Forster. And Nicole is here, and she's going to read us a piece from a beautiful book by Seamus O'Reilly. Thank you, Nicole.
Thanks, Orla. Yes, I'm going to read a short excerpt from Seamus O'Reilly's memoir, Did You Hear Mommy Died?, which is about his experience and his family's experience of his mother's death, which Sheila O'Reilly, which took place just before he turned 6. And it's a really beautiful book. He's an incredibly talented journalist and author, and he's been incredibly supportive of National Grief Awareness Week this year by sharing pieces of his own writing that kind of explore how writing and other acts of remembrance have helped him along in his own grief journey. So I'll read this very quickly. They say the pain of bereavement never leaves you, but it is easier if it's all you've really known. I was so young when Mammy died that I sometimes felt as though I didn't know her well enough to grieve the same way my older siblings did, and that it was somehow false for me to claim the same pain as them. I think I've struggled with the shame of this my entire life, I did not experience the same grief as the other members of my family or friends who've been similarly bereaved, because it happened before I was able to understand it. The funny version of this story is the antidote that forms the title of this book, but it hides a deeper sense of inadequacy, that my high placing on the hierarchy of grief was false, inauthentic. To a large extent, me telling the story is designed to hide that shame. It's true that my experience simply wasn't the same as that of my older brothers and sisters, and it couldn't be. I still sometimes feel embarrassed when grieving friends approach me for advice, as if I could ever review the coping methods used so successfully by that chirpy little 5-year-old and write them the same prescription. Right, here's my advice. Are you taking this down? Step 1, B5. In truth, the pain didn't leave as well as I thought it had. I muddled through the shallow understanding of grief my 5-year-old self could manage, and when the collective tears died down, I told myself the job was done. I buried it out of fear and shame and an inability to know how and when to grieve for myself. So during sleepless nights, it stopped waiting for my permission and sought its own way out. Its price was not waived, but deferred, and the bill had finally arrived. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole, and a gifted writer. He managed to portray so much in that short piece. And thank you for the lovely reading. We're going to call in our panel members now. It means meeting Catherine and Sonia again. And we're going to introduce some of the trained and very life experienced volunteers from the bereavement support line. We have Pauline, Morna, Mark and Rita. Hello, and thank you all for joining us and to be sharing some of your observations and maybe some direction for some of the questions that have come in. And because we have most of a half an hour, but I'm still going to get on with this so that we get through as many as possible. I'm going to start, I think, with you, Mark. And this is somebody who's worried about someone else. And they're saying, I'm worried about my mother. She seems to have given up after Dad died. How do we help her to move on with life?
Okay, this is a common type of question that we experience in the line quite frequently. Captain's already covered some of the basics on this, so I'll just take a slightly different view of it. I had a call recently from a young woman who said that I'm meeting a friend this afternoon for coffee. Her father died recently and she was wondering how she could help her. And I remember saying to her that she's already done the biggest thing that she can do before we even started the conversation. She's meeting her and she's managed to get her out of the house and she's providing a space for her friend to talk. And she's also getting a coffee into the bargain as well. So, and provided social interaction, which are all big things before she's even considered what impact she's had. So I would say the same for somebody who's trying to support their mother and is worried about them, is that the best piece of advice I can give is to be the person that turns up and be the traveling companion. Because if you do turn up, you get to see exactly what your mother is like. You get to find out if she's eating, if she's sleeping, what the general state of the house is like. You know, is she looking after herself? You get to find out all of these practical things from the word go that Catherine spoke about earlier. As well as that, you're also providing the space for your mother to speak, to reminisce about Dad, and you're also in a position to make sure that that should she decide to speak, that you can gently remind her that of all of the good times that she's had with Dad over the years. And I'd probably finish off this bit by saying is also just be mindful of the fact that she is mother and that she'll have her own boundaries and to be gentle and not to push too hard. So, and that it will take time and to keep visiting and be as regular as you can because you're also providing human connection as well. It's infinitely better than somebody who will just say, is there anything I can do? And then you never see them again. So summing up, be the traveling companion and be the person who turns up. That's 90% of it done straight off.
Thanks, Mark. You've put it lovely, and the persistence of just presence and keeping with her, rather than being over prescriptive. So thank you. I'm going to turn to Morna now, because in a way it's a question that's the opposite. So instead of people rushing in to help someone, this person has said that her dog has died and she's devastated, and she doesn't feel that anyone understands. And in our questions coming up just this evening as well, there's someone else, and I don't know who died, but they're saying nobody is there, nobody's turning up. So maybe if you could just talk to us a little about that type of experience, Morna.
Sure, absolutely. And then certainly we get more and more calls on the bereavement support line around pet grief. And it's certainly in the past it would have been maybe acknowledged a little bit less and more hidden perhaps. And maybe people had less understanding around it, but more and more we're seeing more and more acknowledgement and recognition. And I mean, if we think about it, our pets can be such a huge part of our lives, and they can live much shorter lives than us. So we can be, many of us have experienced pet bereavement and will do. And they can be really, really woven into the fabric of our lives. Our pets, a huge part, and with us through formative times and important moments and all sorts. So their loss can really be huge. And so we really understand that on the line, and where your calls around pet bereavement are so welcome. We really understand and acknowledge and recognize that. And we have also a wealth of knowledge on our website. So if you look at Irish Hospice Foundation Pet Loss, there's enormous amounts of information there, a leaflet, and there are other agencies as well linked on that website offering lots more information. I was made aware this week of a lovely walk this Sunday for Dogs Trust Ireland, who encourage people around the country who've lost a pet, a dog in particular, to go on that favourite walk this Saturday. So everyone in their own space is doing it on their own favourite routes, but together in solidarity, having lost their animal friend. And there's lots of other sort of events, activities, ways of commemorating and celebrating our four-legged and two-legged friends that we can offer you to link in with in the bereavement support line as well.
Lovely.
Yeah.
And you're doing a lot of validating there for people who have those experiences. The second part of that is, when people don't show up, after a death of anyone, I know myself from the line that people can feel very let down and isolated and aggrieved again by that. What might you say to somebody who's feeling that alone, I guess?
For sure, for sure. And we can feel so alone in our grief. It's a very normal experience, I think, as well, to feel quite isolated. I think it can feel like it's our grief and nobody else's. But actually, it's important to remember that you are not alone in your grief. Like Catherine said, we are here to grieve with you. I think it's something important as well that I would say often on the line is sometimes we can feel that people aren't engaging with our grief in the way that we want. Maybe we want to talk, maybe we want to be asked, but sometimes people can feel that they don't have the words. But often we can miss some of the well-intentioned things, like somebody asking us something, maybe the words don't land particularly right with us, but actually, what is the intention? I think often people intend to reach across and say, I'm thinking about you, rather than maybe focusing on, sometimes the words can be a little bit ill stated, but that's to come back to people's intention, I think is important.
Right.
But in terms of the line, I think, we are here and we are here to grieve with you. And sometimes it can be so important just to talk, just to be heard, just to say the person's name with us and to reminisce, to celebrate. And we can give you very specific strategies and tips and advice around how to actually deal with your particular grief. So yeah, we are listening and we are here. So do give us a call.
Thank you. I think that's a lovely way of putting things, that what intention is there, and maybe helping someone to find the language of reaching out and asking for what they need. Thank you, Morna. Rita, I'm going to go to you now with a question that came up. And this person says, I feel so guilty and I have a lot of regrets. What do I do with that? I don't know if that's something that you come up against.
Yeah, I suppose in the aftermath of a loss, especially if it's somebody that you've cared for, and regardless, even if it's a sudden death, with the loss of that person, we often find we've time on our hands, that person has gone out of our lives, and we ruminate and we think back, and in that we often focus on the negative rather than of what we did or what we should have done or what we could have done. And realistically, in any situation, we did what we did at the time with the resources we had, whether that was just our own personal resources, the time, the what was in us to give to the person at the time or whatever. I suppose in that situation, you really need to see what is behind that comment. What are they talking about? What are they feeling guilty about? Was it a particular strain on the relationship? Was it that they didn't do enough in the run up to the death? So it's to be quite gentle. If that person rings the line, it's to tease out and sort of reality check. Why do you feel guilty? What is it you feel guilty about? Because and there may have been issues. It may be real. There may have been things that could have been done differently. But again, you go back to the person and you reassure them that you did what you could in that situation or at that time. Um, I suppose to share a personal experience, my own mum lived with us for years and lived to her 94th year. And while only in latter years needed care. And I suppose after her passing, people were telling me she got great care and all that stuff, the things we tell people. And yet that guilt, that by the time she died as her carer, I was tired. And again, and often, I really had to look at that for myself, that I did what I could in the circumstances. And in that grief or in that ruminating, when the time is there and the time is heavy, you focus on the negative. And the fact that all the positives and all the good things and all the good times in those years, they kind of were lost. And the bit that was left at times was that bit that I was tired by the end and didn't give as much as I wanted to. So it's really about teasing out with the person and validating the feelings they have. They're very real. The feelings are very real and those thoughts are very real. The reality may not be true. There may not be something to be guilty about. For that person who rings the line, they are feeling guilty. So what is that about for them? And let them explore that and reality check that for themselves. And again, encourage them and reassure them that they did what they did at that time because that's where they were at that time.
To be able to give voice to it, exactly.
Exactly, yeah.
And
And even to, sorry, Ola, to
no,
link
go on.
back into what Catherine said about those continuing bonds, that person is still with us in spirit. And, I would often, and for some people it rests with them and some it doesn't, but you can still have that conversation with that person. They're gone, but if there's something that you really feel heavy on your heart, write the letter, have the conversation with the person who's gone, and just hear yourself having that conversation with them and hear yourself verbalizing what it is that you're left, that weight that you're left. And sometimes that can help people, something that may be alien for some people, but you don't know until you have the conversation with the caller. And for some people, they come back and say, God, yeah, that's a good idea. Other people would say, no, I could never do that. That's okay. But just offer them some opportunity to tease out that guilt that they're carrying, and try and find the good things or the positives that have been there as well without negating that real feeling that they have.
Yeah, I think that's such sound advice. And as you said, you never have, you don't know always, and particularly with that question, the background to something.
Yeah.
But I'm seeing on the questions coming in here a good deal of reflection of just how complex families are as well. And guilt is a hard thing to discuss within a family. So sometimes maybe going to one of the support organizations that we were talking about earlier, or ringing a completely objective person on the bereavement support line is a way of exploring that. But as you said, to get it out and to look at it and look at different ways of considering it. Thank you, Rita. Pauline, we've been talking a lot about feelings and talking about feelings, and yet one person had written in and they had said, that they don't feel comfortable talking about their feelings. Like, are they doing it wrong, or should they be doing other things?
Well, I suppose, it's a universal thing nowadays that we're to be able to talk about your feelings is it's a rare thing indeed. And so for some people, the avenues, um, what I always suggest on the support line is that people might try journaling. Um, and it's uniquely different to keeping a diary because, it's a blank copybook as such. And I always say, go out and buy the most colourful journal that you can find. You're not then chasing the date or the month or whatever. So you've got time to actually put your feelings down on paper, and you can be brutally honest with yourself in the comfort of your own home. And you can say whatever you need to say to empty out that head that's full of whatever it is, the mess of the loss or the agony of the grief, whatever it is, and just to understand that it's so normal, to feel that you're not able to express your feelings, it's a universal thing. And as Catherine alluded to earlier, grief it's a messy road. It's a really, really messy road. You're going up a hill and you think you're just about to get to the summit, and the next thing you've got another journey, and there's so many other resources out there, like, art therapy, finding somebody that or even an art group, like to, express yourself that way if that's your inclination. And I always suggest as well on the support line, books are a brilliant resource. For me personally, Richard E. Grant, A Pocket Full of Happiness, he details a 40-year love affair with his wife who was dying of cancer, and the brutal honesty within the book, but also the chink of hope, and how she challenged him, and they spoke about, the life after her, when she was going to pass. And she said to him, you've got to look for the pocket full of happiness every day. And he said that's what drove him forward and kept him going. But I think really it's the honesty, Orla, accepting, that that's just where you are. And we all talk about time and the gift of time, but we can only accept the gift of time when we're a little bit further down the road, when we're looking backwards. And the journal then is the gift that can actually push you forward, because you can look back and say, well, actually, that's how I felt, 6 months ago or 3 months ago. And actually now I feel differently. And we hear that all the time from the people who ring us back 6 months later or 3 months later, and they verify that, that I am actually feeling different and I'm feeling more positive.
Yeah. And that you can plot it out. You can put down what you're thinking as much as what you're feeling, what you're doing. And then, as you said, in art, that people do grief as well as feel grief. And I think so well done to all of you. It's so much more than just being sad. And again, I know we won't have time to get to every question here, but there's a lot of pain and overwhelm, and really trying to make sense of balancing the call of life and the toughness of grief. So there's a lot of, I want to just acknowledge the pain that people are in, and that we will be tailoring the resources as we said. So thank you for that, Pauline. I'm going to go back to you, Catherine. And it's again, I'm mixing two questions here. One that had come in earlier, which was from a woman who cared for her husband for years, and I'm now completely lost, she says. And so, in other words, she's pleading, what should she be doing? And then I have another comment here from a woman who is asking, how do you grieve alone if you're housebound, and people aren't around you? So two examples of just totally changed lives.
Absolutely. I'll start with the first one, Orla, just to say that again, we've lots of experience of people who are carers who phone the line when their loved one dies, and they really are, as that lady said, completely lost. They've lost their identity, their role. Some of the carers might have been carers for, I mean, 10 years, 20 years. And if you think about that road, it was kind of the ever decreasing circles of difficulty, a bit like, and I love, Rita, what you shared, the difficulties increase and the energies go down and you're just worn out. And it often falls to women, and women are very hard on themselves. And women, when they get to that point, that they're grieving so much because they're grieving the person who has died, but they also lost that person long before in terms of the person that they knew and loved and maybe married or have lived their lives with. So they've been living that loss for so long. They've been pouring themselves into the caring role, which we know for carers, if they have medical appointments, they're going here, they're going there, they're lifting people. Even I know a lady who's caring. She's in her 80s and she's caring for her husband, and even his physical needs and trying to move him and lift him and the mood. So that sense of, you remember I talked about the primary loss is the loss of the person, but a carer has so many secondary losses because the loss of role, purpose, meaning. What in the world is their life about now? And I think sometimes the really hidden loss there is also sometimes that this person, they lost all those years. I remember we got a call from someone, and honestly, most of their married life, they'd been a carer for a complicated reason. And the loss of all of those years of what life could have been. I mean, that carer will know another woman who's with her husband and they're off on trips and they're doing whatever they're doing, or playing golf or going on walks or going to retirement things or going dancing. This woman has lost herself often in these roles, and all the nodding heads. I mean, all the volunteers can resonate with that because you lose yourself, and it's as Rita said, it's wearing and you get worn out, and then you're left with what's it all about, because purpose, meaning, identity. So I would say to that woman two things. One is, you know, and you said it, Orla, and I think it's really important to say it again. Ask for what you need and think about what you need. Think about what you need. And the same for that lady who's housebound. Think about what you need and ask for it. Who's your circle of support? And even for that lovely lady who's the carer, she'll have friends, and she will have friends who are encouraging her maybe to come out, come for coffee, meet for, say yes to some of them, push those boundaries a little bit, because when you're a carer and you've been doing it for so long, you kind of forget how to do social life and how to move out because your life has shrunk. So I think that's really important. And remember, the line is here. If you're a carer, Family Carers Ireland is a great organisation and offer counselling. That's just an option. But also for the lady who's housebound, there's so many phone options. She's an older lady, alone, senior line. Help me out, your friends of the elderly. There's so many things that are also over the phone, and ask for what you need. Orla, I think that's a really important message too. Yeah.
Thank you. And it's a hard thing to do. We are all more wired to help others than
That's it.
ourselves. So I think, yeah, thank you, Catherine. So Sonia, really, I know I'm acutely aware all of those people would have had children in the families, and would have, who, they're all part of that context. But just again, we're getting questions about children and when they should be really concerned about them. So I'm wondering, could you just give a little guidance on, right, I'm worried, should I be, what do I need to do now?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd say if you're worried, there are lines that you can reach out to. So Bernardo's has an information support line, Bernardo's Children's Bereavement Service. So even just to bounce something off someone like that or ourselves, just to run things by, to either kind of go, okay, it's not a concern or it is. But in terms of kind of specific things, so I mentioned earlier that absence of puddle jumping, where the child is just either consistently low or they could be consistently hyper. If it's out of character for them, it's worth a little bit of inquiry into that. Same with kind of pronounced anxiety or deep sadness that's getting worse or not better, not better over time, despite maybe all your best efforts to help. At that point, you'd be looking for a little bit of maybe more professional help. As I mentioned there a second ago, very different behavior than you would be used to. I'm stealing this from someone, but I'll steal it anyway. We grieve how we live, and so if you're seeing something very out of character, then it might be worth a bit of an inquiry. Withdrawal from friends and activities. So if you had a child who would tend to have withdrawn to the room and maybe stuck to the books and the computer games, and they're still doing that, I wouldn't be too concerned. But if there is withdrawal from maybe a child that was very much into sports and that sort of thing, or hanging out with the friends, have a look. Then they may need some help. I'd also say if they ask, and if particularly around teenagers. So if a teenager says, "I'd like to talk to a counsellor," try and facilitate it in as much as you can, because it's important to strike while the iron's hot. They may not want to at another time. Sleep, appetite, any of those physical things that when they're disrupted, it's really important to nip that in the bud. A key one then is if a child is blaming themselves and it's not lifting after maybe a couple of conversations with your help, or with yourself, definitely maybe get a little bit of support there, because that can become entrenched, and it's such a heavy thing for a child to be carrying, that sort of self-blame.
Yeah.
Then I guess the last piece is, I'd say, is if there's kind of self-harm or suicidal ideation, then act on that. Where a child expresses that, definitely worth an inquiry with a professional.
Great, and don't wait about. Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Sonia. Um, we are coming very close to the end, and we're always a stickler to make sure we don't keep people here longer than we said we would. We will follow up as we have promised. It'll be generic, as opposed to individual following up that we do, but there will be organizational signposting as well for some of your very specific queries.
Mm.
I really want to thank everyone today for giving of their knowledge, their expertise, their hearts and their time and their own person. This is a really personal evening, so I thank you all, and I thank everyone for attending, and reminding you that you are in the company virtually of others. To end, I do want to make some thanks, in particular, as I said earlier, to thank Flanagan's Funeral Directors, because it's a lovely partnership we have, and I think it really models how it's important to be there at the time of death and provide support in the bereavement in the early days. But the rest of us are trying to look at then how to provide support in the weeks and months and years afterwards. So it's lovely that Flanagan's acknowledge the work we do in that space. I particularly want to thank the team who put this evening together, Nicole and Dervla and Roisin, and our volunteers here from the bereavement support line, all the services you met on screen earlier, what probably feels like 10 hours ago, but was in fact only 90 minutes ago. As I said, I particularly want to thank Dervla, who you haven't seen or met, but she will be sending out so much of this information along with Roisin. The people, I suppose the way we try and end is on a reading. And I'm going to introduce you now to our colleague Neil. to show that it's not just women. Thank you, Mark, for your presence as well. And I noticed we had some men lighting candles earlier. And I'm introducing Neil to do a little reading before we close, which is a lovely poem by Paula Meehan, and to me speaks of hope. And I think it's an appropriate way of ending. So basically, we'll go to Neil's reading, and then there will be a short slide display, and the webinar is over. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thanks, Orla. This is Seed by Paula Meehan. The first warm day of spring, and I step out into the garden from the gloom of a house where hope had died, to tally the storm damage, to seek what may have survived. And finding some forgotten lupins I'd sowed from seed last autumn, holding in their fingers a raindrop each, like a peace offering or a promise. I am suddenly grateful and would offer a prayer if I believed in God. But not believing, I bless the power of seed, its casual, useful persistence, and bless the power of sun, its conspiracy with the underground, and thank my stars the winter's ended.